Okay, hello everybody. I mentioned that I would do a video for my Facebook Christian page, Christian ministry page about Bibles, and so I had put a post. I apologize beforehand. My allergies are horrendous, and they're a little bit better right now than they've been. I didn't sleep much last night, as some of you saw, because I was commenting at 2:50 in the morning. My eyes are really, really bad because of the cedar allergies. So I apologize beforehand for all of that. It might improve during the time of the video, but we'll see. Anyway, so I had put a comment up about ministers and Bibles, and the main purpose of it, pardon me, was the discussion about ministers and teachers. And as a metaphor for that, I used Bibles. And I know that when you discuss these sort of things, because of a lot of the polemical debates and everything that are going on, people can get a little sensitive about it. It's almost like if I said, I don't like blondes, then, people feel like because that's my opinion that I'm forcing my opinion on them, even though I say that's my opinion. And so, if I say, I don't like something or I don't use something, then people can sometimes take offense of that. And so in general, this thread on my Facebook page is not what I want to encourage. Um, and the reason why this site is a lot different than most that you'll find is that I'm not encouraging a platform for everybody's opinions. By nature, um, I have a very diverse audience, and so the rules of the platform are very, very stringent. And that's because after 15 years of Bible teaching and preaching, I've learned that, like construction, everybody has an opinion, and most of them are not of no value whatsoever. It doesn't mean the people aren't; it means their opinions aren't because they're uneducated. And so I'm not. I'm not. Pardon me, I had a notification. I'm not encouraging that type of back and forth. I have no problem with questions. If people want to type in a question, but I'm going to encourage you not to say, well, my opinion is, because you have a format for that. You have your own pages. You can start your own Christian page and you can tell people your opinion. And it's not because, this is some kind of fiefdom or I'm somehow the Pope. It's just that you have to cut that stuff off at the root, especially when you're talking about theology, because there are so many bad ideas. I will spend so much time the presuppositional errors, logical fallacies, um, heretical ideas, bad arguments. In one post, it could take me hours to take it apart, and I just don't want to spend the time doing that. So generally, when I give my opinion and I say I reject most modern Bibles because of this, I'm just giving my opinion. And if you want to ask me a question about a particular Bible, I'm fine with that. But I don't want to encourage, well, I like this version because that do that on your page. I'm not scolding anybody. I appreciate the back and forth, and I'm going to allow that at some level, but that's not what this page is for. And so my main point was that I believe that a Bible, like a minister, has to show evidence that it is authoritative and that it is um, something demonstrable, provides demonstrable evidence that it has been of use in tough times and in difficulties and persecutions. And so I'm not somebody that thinks that just because you can do a new translation or because the language is changing that we ought to automatically have one. There were reasons for some translations to come about. The Wycliffe, pardon me, the Wycliffe Bible in the 1380s, and some of the other ones were necessary because of the way that in the format that was used. I think though that once we ended up with the Tyndale Bible, which most all of the Geneva King James is all almost exactly in line with the Tyndale Bible, that the testimony of the use of that Bible in the conversion, and first of all, in standing against error and exposing the error of Catholicism, etc. And then its utility in bringing in the subsequent improvements in bringing forth the Protestant Reformation, the Puritans, and all of that is a testimony as to the utility and the divine hand on those virgins. And I require the same of preachers, and that is that they show a divine calling, not through miracles or anything like that, but that they do so by a utility in the lives of men, and a sign, ample testimony of the authority that God has bestowed upon those whom He calls, and that's not everyone. And so I don't think that seminaries produce preachers any more than ovens produce biscuits, and so now people will argue, well, I use the fill in the blank version and I find it to be very accurate. Well, good. If it works for you, then it works for you. I'm very skeptical because we do live in a period of general apostasy, and everybody likes their congressman, but nobody likes Congress because Congress is corrupt. But most people think nobody's sitting there going, "Oh, my Bible's bad." Nobody thinks that, and yet we have a period of general apostasy where you have entire apostate churches, these modern churches who the Word of God's not even welcome in there, or a true Word of God, or any type of teaching on holiness or separation, or any of the things that the Bible focuses on. And yet every one of those people in those churches, these mega churches and Joel Osteen and all that stuff, they have Bibles. And not one of those people is going to say, "Oh, my Bible's bad." They all think they're good. And so opinion really holds no value. The Bible says, "Lean not on your own understanding." And so there were these steps of canonicity that were used in establishing the original books of the Bible, what books were to be accepted and received by the church. And the word canon means ruler. And so it's something by which you measure everything else. It doesn't mean there's no value in everything else. It means that you have to have something to measure those things. So, for example, the Apocrypha, some of those books even quoted by Christ and others, was not included in the canon because there were some questions as to their authority or their authorship. And we don't want to be measuring other things by those books. We want to measure those books by the things we know. And so the first thing you have to do in establishing the truth of anything is you have to have constant. You have to have something that doesn't move. And so that was what the establishment of the canon was. And so I use the same rules of the establishment of the canon for my interpretation of what Bibles I want to use. And I use a lot of Bibles, as you'll see. And so then what I did this morning is I went around within 6 feet of me and gathered up, and not even all of the Bibles. Some of you have seen my big John Brown self-interpreting Bible. And there's another 15 Bibles within 6 or 8 feet of me that I'm not showing. I also have a whole shelf of what I consider to be non-valuable or apostate Bibles. And I use those for study when people ask me questions and all that. But of just the ones that I thought would be interesting to you, I've got a couple of stacks here. And so I thought I'd show you those. And I also have a lot more in storage. And so I'm a collector of Bibles. This was one that when I first started studying the Bible, I found to be of some use. This is a Wuest New Testament. And basically, Wuest is a Greek scholar. And the Wuest New Testament, basically, his purpose is to use all of the words necessary to render a section of Scripture as close as he feels like he can get to the original, what the original meaning was. So instead of just the words that were in the original, he uses as many words as possible to convey the same idea. And, I used this for a little while just to try to help me understand some things, and I did not find it of tremendous value. Some people do. I also, over here on the bookshelf, I have the 4 books of the Wuest New Testament. We talked about the Geneva Bible. This is one of my Geneva Bibles, 1599 Geneva. If I had to recommend a adult Bible, and I use by adult, I mean, you're not. Let me say something real quickly. One of the arguments for new Bibles is that the language is changed, or the language of the King James or the Geneva is too difficult. I patently reject that. It's not difficult at all. To say letteth instead of let is not does not render the section indiscernible. Not only that, but the poetry and the memorableness of the verses, I think, are better in those versions. And so to say, and I answered a question to somebody on the forum the other day, and I get asked quite often, why, your teachings, your commentaries, their difficulty is too high. I don't agree with that. I think you need to challenge yourself. You need to be able to learn how to study and how to learn things. And I don't think bringing the Bible down to whatever the intellectual infirmity of the people is the answer. I think the answer is to lift and remove the infirmity and intellectual infirmity of the people up to the level where you can study materials that have great value. So when I'm studying and I read John Owen is very difficult for even scholars to read, but I do it because it challenges me, and then I can translate a lot of that to in a way that people can understand it without dumbing it down to the point that it loses all of its meaning. And so what I'm trying to do is lift people up in their understanding. And I think the same thing is true of the Bible. That to go out and get a plain street language Bible is folly. First of all, because there's no way that you're going to adequately represent the imagery necessary, the truth, inner truth, and the system and context by street language. And it's foolish to do it. You're just to me, I think you're dumbing people down even further, and the next generation will be worse. So if I was to suggest a Bible that I think is whole and complete and has a valuable margin notes. I generally don't like margin notes, but the 1599 Geneva Bible, the Geneva Bible is almost 95% or more word for word from the King James. The King James was after. This is 1599. The King James was 1611. There was actually a Geneva Bible in, I think, 1553, and there was another one after that. But this is kind of the accepted Bible of the Reformation. This was the Bible of the Puritans. This was the Bible that really rocked the whole world in that time period, and produced so many valuable materials that we're still cruising on the fumes of the Reformation. Yesterday was Reformation Day, so I want to mention the 1599 Geneva Bible. I think it's very valuable, and it has it does have, they call them margin notes, but it has notes down here. This is going to be backwards to you, and I find them to be very valuable. And I like this. This is the Tall Ledge. And I think we saw these online the other day for less than $100, $80 or something like that. This is my kind of original copy of the Geneva Bible 1599, leather bound, but it is a photocopy of the original, which allows me to see it with the original spelling. And this is kind of a collector's item, but I really, really enjoy it. Pardon me, my allergies. This is my Spanish-English. This is the version Reina Valera 1960. And when I was preaching in Mexico and other places, I found this to be very valuable because I could go to the text that I know in my mind in English, and then it in parallel, so it has like the Psalms in English, and then right next to it is the same psalm in Spanish. So if someone asks me a question, I can go to it in English, and I know what I'm reading in the Spanish. And so I love this Bible, and I've used this and used it out in the field. This is one I talked about on the Christian page, and this is the English Hexapla. Got this from Stillwater's Revival Books, and this is a photocopied hardback. And the Hexapla basically takes the 6 earliest English language versions and puts them in parallel. And you read it like this. All right, so you have 6 columns across, and they all have the same verse in a different version. So I can read the Wycliffe version of 1380, compare it to the Tyndale version of 1534, the Cranmer version of 1539, the Geneva 1557, the Douay-Rheims, which is the Catholic Bible, 1582, and then the Authorized King James of 1611. And I can see where a lot of error slips in, or I can see where somebody might have gotten a particular translation. And I use this quite often if I want to get a better. And up here at the top, it's got the original Hebrew or Greek at the top. So you can use a comparison, right? And that's the English Hexapla. And you might still be able to get this from Stillwater Revival Books. I highly recommend it. All right, this next one is 2 volumes, also from Stillwater Revival Books. And this is the King James Version with the Geneva Bible Notes. And so if you're just so used to the King James Version that you're not really hip on going to the Geneva fully, this provides you the Geneva Bible Notes, which are very valuable. Personally, I wouldn't buy this. I would get me a good King James 1611 and a Geneva with the Bible Notes, and then you can do it without having this 2-volume set on your shelf. This is my interlinear Bible, Hebrew Greek interlinear. And this is valuable because you can open up to a section of Scripture or to a verse, and it's got the Hebrew or the Greek or whatever the original language was. It has a word for word direct translation underneath the Hebrew or the Greek symbol. And then on the left-hand side or through the columns, it has a literal translation. So they're not even trying to make it convey the meaning it would have had to those people in today's terms. It is a literal, word-for-word, literal version. And so you have in this case it's a proverb, so you have your Hebrew. Under each one of the Hebrew symbols, you have your English word or words that translate, and then in the columns you have a literal translation. And so I find this to be valuable too, to understand when someone says offhand they use gobbledygook, and they're like, well, in the Greek this means, I like to go check their work. All right, that's the end of that stack. So I'm going to put some of these back so my other stack doesn't collapse. If you know me, you know that I am surrounded on all sides by books. All right, and so this is my actual day-to-day preaching Bible. I read out of about 3 or 4 Bibles that I have at different locations, but this is my Bible I preach out of. And one of the things I do, I get a new Bible about every 5 years because I want to get rid of my own notes. I don't want to be corrupted by my own notes. And so when I start a new Bible, every time I read any chapter, I put a check mark. So you can see how many times I've read that chapter just in that book. So of the ones I have, like I went up there at the cottage, that will have 6 or 7 or whatever, 3 or 2 check marks too. So I know how many times I've read that verse. And then I do my own notes throughout. And like I say, when I get this thing so marked up that it becomes confusing to me, then I'll either give this one away or save it for my children or something. But this, what I really like, this is the King James Version. This is the wide margin edition, so it gives me room to write notes. It's got a concordance in the back of it, and then I put, it's got note paper in the back, and I put notes for particular topics that I'm asked about a lot. so that while I'm up at the podium, if someone says, "Well, what about this verse?" I don't mean to make fun of people, but I have lists of answers and things that I've written on those topics. All right, so this is my King James. This is the Bible I preach out of. This is, and I have a lot of old Bibles too. A lot of the ones I brought here are just samples because I have whole shelves of old collectible King James. This is the New Analytical Edition, and the main reason I like this to use this, although I don't agree with some of the things that are in here, it has a great history of the preservation of the Bible, and the reasons given for versions up through, I think, the American Revised Standard. But it has the canon, how the canon was gathered, preservation of the Bible. The ancient versions goes through the Septuagint and all those things. The manuscripts that were found later on, and that's one thing I wanted to mention. In one of the comments on that thread, someone said the oldest manuscripts. I would be wary of falling for the error that older is better, because some of these older versions were found in the basement of the Vatican and the Vaticanus, and a lot of the translation or the transcribing of those were done by Jesuits. And so I would be very cautious. Just because something is older doesn't necessarily make it better. How we know something is canon was the system of canonicity that was used, which means that the more extant manuscripts that were accepted by the church and were used by the church, and it strengthened the church and it gave this church spiritual power, those are more valuable than if somebody right now was digging in my field and found a text of the Bible from 31 AD, that no one had ever seen before. It would be silly for me to automatically grant that text. Like there weren't heretics already. There were. In fact, even in the scriptures even say, even at that time, Paul says, as soon as I leave, grievous wolves entered in, not sparing the flock. So there was error early. And so some of the manuscripts, though they might have been found earlier, but our later manuscripts, when those manuscripts were accepted and received by the earliest church, the persecuted church, and they were the translation of those manuscripts are the ones that God used to get the Waldenses through persecution, the Paulicians, the Wycliffe era, Jan Hus era church, and all the way up through the Cathari and the Puritans, etc. Those have the testimony of biblical authority that some other texts don't have. So it's not just antiquity that we should look at. We need to look at the testimony of the Spirit through time concerning that text. Who's embracing that text? Where was this text found? Why was it there? Is it authentic? Those are all questions. All right, so that little part of this New Analytical Version I like. This is a King James, and it's called the Teacher's Edition. Something Teacher's Edition. I'm going to sneeze. I brought my Kleenex over here. Anyway. And here's another reason that I don't like a lot of Bibles. When I find a Bible and it's got a picture of Jesus in it, that's forbidden in this very Bible to make likenesses of the deity. It's a violation of the commandments. Then I'm not going to put much stock. And so a lot of these, they claim to be King James versions, but within them, they even say, well, we kept the King James text, but in parentheses, we put a better translation. And so I'm a little bit wary. And I automatically, when I see that somebody went and put pictures in there, it downgrades it quite a bit. This is a 1611 hardback. And I use this one mainly for study because it has the, if I remember right, this has the Apocrypha in it. If I can, it may, I can't remember. I think it did. I think the original had the, yeah, it has the Apocrypha in it, Wisdom of Solomon. And so I get questions sometimes about these things, and so I use this for study. And it's all in the original 1611 spelling and all that. This is a King James, old King James. Most of these are late 1800s, early 1900s. And again, well, this one doesn't have it. All right, so this one doesn't have pictures. But one thing I liked about this Bible is it has some great study notes in the back that are fairly old, and there's a great Bible dictionary in it that's of use. All right, this is an old King James, leather bound. This was somebody's study Bible. I like this because it has tabs for the books. Pardon me. Again, big picture of not Jesus on there. That's not Jesus, by the way. The common picture of Jesus is one of the sons of one of the early popes. And I just knocked the cover off of it. Anyways, so I don't generally use this. Won't use this Bible because I don't want to encourage that sort of thing. But I like these antiques. It's got a family register in it here of the people who owned it, with marriage records and things like that. If I find old Bibles like this, I usually buy them. Someday, I'll have a big collection. I already have a big collection, but all right. So that's the ones that just the Bibles that I had within about 6 feet of where I'm sitting right now. A lot of those I use regularly. I do encourage questions on the Facebook page, but again, let's try to stick to the rules as much as possible, and not make that into a polemical discussion about what other people's opinions are, because I think people have an outlet to give their opinions, and this is just not it. So appreciate it, you guys. I got to do a couple other videos, and I wanted to make sure that I did this one while I could with my allergies. All right, talk to y'all later.